Well, hello and welcome to my YouTube videos. I'm Professor Kent Lee. I'm assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature, that is the English department at Bugyeong National University in Busan, Korea. And this series of videos is mainly for classes that I teach here, but also for those of you out there in YouTube land who might benefit from this too. We're talking about the writing process. So this is mainly for college, university students, graduate students also, who want to improve their writing skills. And so one of the first things to do is to examine your own writing process, to reflect on it and to evaluate it and to think about what is working and what is not working. And there's no one kind of writing process for everybody. It's not like one size fits all. It's about finding what works for you. There are some things that will generally work and be very recommended for anybody doing academic writing, and there are some things that are really going to depend on you and your personality. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the work environment, your planning and preparation stage, what we call pre-writing, which is generating and organizing ideas, revising, the process of revising, and writing difficulties. I'll talk about difficulties a little bit in this video and more in a later video in detail. So let's say you have a writing assignment to do, an essay, a research paper, or some shorter writing task in a class. How do you go about doing it, getting started? What thoughts first go through your head? Panic, terror, dread, anxiety? Or, oh cool, this sounds interesting. Or a challenge. This sounds fun. This sounds like a learning experience. It may depend on the class too. That's something to keep in mind. How do you get started? How do you start getting ideas, getting information, organizing your ideas and your thoughts? And then how do you start writing? Let's talk about getting started, the initial phases. The work environment. What kind of work environment do you need in order to do your writing, to get started with the pre-writing process or the actual writing process? Do you need a quiet environment? Do you need a noisy environment? Do you need music in the background? Do you need to be alone? Do you need to be with people? And this may depend on your personality. If you're an introvert, you might prefer quiet and being alone. Now, let's get one thing straight. An introvert does not mean that you don't like people. In psychology, it means that you get your energy from being alone, from your downtime, your time by yourself, relaxing, or just thinking about things by yourself. An extrovert gets his or her energy from being with people, from social interaction. The introvert is not antisocial. It's just the introvert needs time alone to think or to regain their mental energy. So if you're an introvert, you might prefer quiet, you might prefer being alone. If you're an extrovert, you might prefer being with people when you study. Whatever works for you is fine. You might like music in the background. Now, maybe your parents told you, don't listen to music when you're studying, it will distract you. Is that true? No. I mean, it's unlikely you're going to work well with heavy metal in the background, but who knows? Maybe it works for you. There's always part of your brain that kind of wants to wander off and think about something else. And maybe music can keep part of your brain kind of engaged so that the rest of your brain can focus on what you need to do. For some people, music works. Maybe music without lyrics or even music with lyrics. Whatever works for you. It may also depend on the kind of writing task that you have to do. Planning and preparation. Do you start planning right away? Let's say the professor gives you a writing assignment. Do you start planning right away or do you put it off? Now, in this case, you could probably think it may be more productive to start planning, at least planning right away. Maybe getting started on the actual writing right away. It may or may not work for you, depending on you and the kind of task that you have to do. There's nothing wrong with just thinking about it for a while. Not necessarily putting it off, but just thinking about it. But what works for you? Do you spend a lot of time mentally planning and preparing, uh, thinking of ideas? How about gathering information? Most likely, you need to gather information, what people call research, which really just means Googling stuff, searching the internet. Well, uh, how do you start gathering information and ideas for your topic? What do you do? Uh, how do you start brainstorming? That is, starting to generate ideas, and then how do you organize things? There are different techniques, and again, it's up to you to really figure out what works for you. It depends on really what you prefer and what works for you, and it may also depend on how difficult the assignment is. But there are different ways that people might go about getting started. Once you've gathered some information, you've done some reading, some background reading on the topic, you might start with one of these ideas. One thing you can do is just free writing. So that means you don't worry about what the professor is expecting. You don't care about the final form or making it nice and pretty. Just writing ideas on paper, words, keywords, phrases, random sentences, whatever. Just free writing. Maybe random sentences. They don't have to make sense. They don't have to be nice grammatical sentences. It doesn't matter. Just getting something on paper as a way of getting started. That's free writing, and it's a type of brainstorming. And that might be a good way for you just to start generating ideas, at least kind of identifying the topic. Your professor says, write about this. Well, you probably need to identify a more specific topic within the range of this. And free writing might be a way of identifying different ideas you can and possible subtopics and what you could focus on for your paper. Because very likely the entire topic is not doable in one paper. We'll talk about that more later on. Social brainstorming, especially if you are an extrovert or if you're just having some difficulty with getting started. Get into a study group, join some friends, at the library or coffee shop, and just verbally discuss the assignment and different ideas. Verbalize different ideas, social brainstorming, just talking about it and throwing around ideas. That can be a way of getting started. And if that works for you, great. Once you've done some free writing, some other kinds of brainstorming, you can use maybe clustering techniques, that is ways of kind of putting them together, or some of these with graphical organizers, or these graphical organizers can just be ways of generating ideas to begin with. So then you can maybe go later to an outline. So graphical organizers, ways of generating ideas or organizing, clustering things together into something that makes sense, doable. One thing that some people like is mind maps or concept maps, semantic maps, sometimes they're called. And again, if this works for you, go for it or try it if you're having difficulty. And especially if you like a kind of graphical representation, this might help you. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It could look like this. It could look like this. So just kind of more of a hierarchical concept map that might help you to organize your ideas. Could look like this, or something like this. Or do free writing and then draw lines and circles to connect things together and start to organize things that way. Combination of free writing and a concept map. You can use flowcharts like this, a Venn diagram like this, or like this. For some people, these might help organize ideas. Now, before you start writing, do you do an outline? Honestly, how many of you get an assignment and you just sit down at the computer and start typing? Does anyone do that? Probably not. At some point you do an outline, maybe on paper, or if you're pretty used to writing like me, I can kind of do a mental outline in my head. I mentally outline it, and then I start my text document on the computer with sort of an outline, and then start writing in the different spaces. But it's really a good idea for a lot of people to do an outline. Now you could do first some kind of brainstorming, free writing, graphical organizer technique or techniques, and then from there develop an outline. And the reason an outline is really, really recommended for academic writing assignments is this: academic writing usually it's expected to have a very clear logical flow of ideas, a very tight logical flow of ideas. That is, your paper. It's expected that your paper, your essay, your research paper, or whatever, is structured very logically. You've got an intro, an introductory paragraph with your thesis statement. That's your main idea, the main purpose of your paper. Not only stating what the specific topic is, but what you want to do with the topic. What's your main position on this topic, or what's your main argument? The core of your analysis, or the core of your argument, or your critique, depending on whether your paper is about analyzing something or proposing a solution or critiquing something or whatever. What is the main point of your paper? And then you have main points under that in order to prove or show X, my thesis. I then need to present specific main points to support that. Main points 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 3 to 5 main points. And each of those main points is going to be the basis of a section of your body, the body of the essay, and then the conclusion. And you can kind of sketch out your main points like this, and then for each main point come up with some subpoints in order to show that. So let's say I'm writing a paper about research that I've done on, a new way. I want to provide some research evidence for this new method I've got for teaching a certain grammar point. So I'm an applied linguist, and I'm doing research on this topic. I'm going to say my research, my specific thesis is my main hypothesis. That is, this technique is going to be better than previous techniques for teaching this kind of grammar point, or this way of explaining things to students. And so I'll have my main points, 1, 2, and 3. And it could be why past techniques were just misguided, or the various main strengths of my technique that I'm arguing for. The main point 1 might be kind of theoretical explanation. 2, this is experiment that I did. 3 is going to be, explaining the results and implications of my experiment. And point 4, what this means for how you teach this in a classroom. That's an example. And for each of these main points, there are going to be subpoints that elaborate on that main point in more detail. Here's kind of a silly example that I got one time. When I was in graduate school, somebody posted something like this in our kind of a shared folder, and a friend asked me if I wrote this. No, I didn't, because I had a weird sense of humor back then. How to trick a writing teacher. By the way, don't do this, because writing teachers know about these tricks. But you can kind of break it up into format tricks and B, content tricks, depending on 1, whether the teacher won't read it, or 2, the teacher will read it. Okay, this is just an example of the outline. Now, whether you go Roman numeral 1, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, little a, little b, those things don't matter. Just some kind of an outline that looks something roughly like this, whatever works for you. This is really ideal because it helps you to structure your essay in a way that works for what is expected in academic writing, what's expected in college writing, or graduate school writing, or as the British say, postgraduate education. So again, you need to find what works for you. Maybe if you're having difficulty, try a combination of these techniques, like free writing, social brainstorming, mind mapping, and then outlining. Whether you write an outline on paper, on the computer screen, or just in your head, whatever works for you. Now, drafting. How do you start writing your first draft? And how often do you revise? That's something to think about. When you think about how effective is your writing process. Once you've gone through all this pre-writing and planning stage, how much time do you need to start writing the first draft? How do you start writing the first draft? Do you write it on paper? Do you just start typing on the computer? Again, whatever works for you. What do you start with first? What's your priority? How do you start first? Are you focusing on the general framework and ideas, like your thesis and the main points, supporting ideas? Are you thinking mainly about the global contents and the information and ideas, just getting them on paper, and then organizing them around a main thesis and main supporting points? Again, whatever works for you, of course. You're focusing on the information support in the body paragraphs. Are you focusing on the minor details like grammar, spelling, vocabulary? Now you can probably guess which is more effective. Probably focusing on any of these except for minor details is a good place to start, but focusing too much on minor details, as we'll see later, it can be a distraction. What about revisions? I mean, how many of you you get an assignment, you just type on the computer, bang it out, turn it in? Hopefully not. You could, if you're a really good writer or if it's an easy topic for you, or it could be that you kind of wait to the last minute, procrastinate. We'll talk about that later. You're like, oh, I've had this assignment for 2 weeks, but it's 11 o'clock and it's due tomorrow. Oh gosh, I better get started. Well, we'll talk about that kind of problem later. But hopefully you do like a first draft and then some revisions. How many do you do? Depends on the task, I'm sure. But how many do you usually do for like a semester final research paper or a smaller assignment? How much do you really need to do? How much do you actually do in order to do a good job on this kind of assignment? What do you focus on when you revise? How long does the process take of revising? Do you get stuck? Do you seek help? I mentioned before social brainstorming, and that's kind of a social strategy. And here too, in the revision stage, if you're taking a class, and especially if it's hard for you, or the writing assignment is hard, it might be a good idea to join a study group. Even if you are an introvert, join a study group. Because, I mean, do you need help? Maybe you can join a study group and read each other's papers and give each other some peer feedback, what we call peer editing or peer reviewing with your classmates. That can be a helpful process. It can kind of make you more aware of your writing by giving feedback to others, and by getting feedback from other people in your paper, you realize, oh, I didn't really express this clearly. I need to do a better job here. I need to make these connections clearer. So by all means, don't be afraid to seek help. Now your poor writing teacher may be overworked and can't really give you a lot of feedback on a draft. May just want to see the final product. But when I say product, that's actually not the right word, because long ago in the past, when people did writing and people taught writing and writing classes up until the 1980s, before the 1980s, it was kind of like people thought it was a product. Give the assignment, go home, type it up, print it out, crank it out like a product, like a factory, bang, like that. But we realized writing is not like that. It's a process. Drafting and revising, it's a process, and it's a process that can often be improved. And it may be helpful to seek help from like a tutor or a classmate, at least, to get some feedback on your paper. Drafting and revising. When you revise, do you focus on the global issues, the overall ideas, contents, flow of ideas, organization, the logical flow and coherence, how persuasive it is, how informative it is, the logical argumentation, the persuasion, the structure and organization? Is there a clear thesis? Are there clear main points in the body paragraphs? Do you focus on the informational level first, like the general contents of the whole essay, factual information, support within the paragraphs and sources and citations, factual contents, and support developing ideas? Probably good. Or do you focus on local or surface level stuff, grammar, vocabulary, mechanics like punctuation, spelling, capitalization? Are you focusing on the grade, the professor's expectations for just getting a good grade, the minimum requirements? Oh, just what I need to do to get a C or D plus on the paper, minimum assignment requirements. Or you focused on actually understanding the contents and learning the contents and saying something in your paper, developing your ideas and learning about the topic. Obviously, you can guess that the local or surface level focus is probably not very helpful until the very end. When you first revise, it's probably better to focus on the more global stuff and then the informational stuff. And maybe finally at the last, you can focus on the local or surface level stuff. That's maybe the last stage of revision process. So when you revise, do you focus mainly on these little things, the surface level features? And is that really a good idea? Unless you're just a really good writer and you don't need to go back and revise the overall contents for a relatively minor assignment, perhaps okay. But what do you focus on when you revise? What do you start with first, and what do you do last? How much time are you spending on each of these, and is this working for you? Now, there could be other task-specific issues that you want to think about when you think about, is your writing process effective? How does it differ for different courses? Because, some classes you like the topic, and other classes you don't like this. That's going to affect things. That's going to affect your motivation and how hard you work. We'll talk about that later. Different kinds of tasks, like a major research paper versus like a one-paragraph assignment in a class. Language issues. Maybe writing in English as a second language is hard for you. That's understandable. And there are a few things you can do about that. We'll talk more in a later video about that and why that's so hard. Writing problems, procrastination, writer's block, and again, second language issues. These could be problems that you're facing. L2 means second language, by the way. There are some short-term solutions, which I'll quickly talk about here. Long-term solutions I'll get to more in a later video. But for difficulties in your writing process, if just overall you find it less efficient, or if you're having specific problems, like you're procrastinating, you're putting it off, you have writer's block. So writer's block means like you sit down at the computer, you want to start writing your paper, and you can't. Been sitting at the screen for an hour, and all you have is the title and maybe the first sentence. You get this block. It's a mental block, and it's like hard to overcome. We'll talk more about that later on, but to begin with, to improve your writing process, maybe short term at least, find your ideal writing style, the process that works for you, for the kinds of assignments that you're doing. Do some self-reflection and self-evaluation of the various things that I've talked about in this video. What are you doing? How is it working for you? Maybe, especially if you're having difficulties, a short-term solution can be, well, just methodically practice some of the different techniques that I talked about. Maybe if you're used to just getting the assignment from class and you kind of think, okay, I'm going to do it like this, maybe a very rough mental outline, and you start trying to type. Maybe that's not working for you. Well, practice some of these different techniques, whatever might seem interesting or helpful to you. Some free writing, some social brainstorming, some mind mapping, and then definitely some outlining. I highly recommend outlining at some point. Create a fairly detailed outline. Use a combination of different things, maybe as a way of getting over some of these problems that you're having in the writing process. Also, plan the task ahead of time. What you're going to do, like today, I'm going to do this, ideally. And of course, things do not go according to plan. So allow some kind of extra room for problems and delays. But kind of plan your writing task. Let's say you have 1 month to do this paper. Well, start planning. How are you going to get started? When do you want to, how much time do you need to look up information and then to brainstorm ideas, maybe join a study group to work on this, and then start drafting and then revising, and allow yourself breaks. You can get mentally tired, especially if you're doing this in a second language. You can get mentally tired. So think about how you're going to do this over the course of 1 week or 4 weeks, however much time you have to do the assignment, and allow yourself some breaks, because sometimes the brain needs time to just work on a problem in the background. Maybe you need to take a break, take a walk, or take a day off, and go hiking somewhere. And in the back of your mind, your brain can be working on this. How do I get over this problem on my paper? I can't really come up with some good contents for this part of my paper. Sometimes your brain needs some time off. And while you're doing something else, relaxing, your brain can kind of work on it in the background and come up with some more ideas. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're not procrastinating, that is putting things off too much. But take breaks if you need to, especially when you're doing this in a second language. It's more mentally tiring, and you may need a little more break time. Do some, as I mentioned, some self-reflection. Seriously reflect on your writing process and how effective it is, the different stages, writing problems that you have. If you're having problems with getting stuck, writer's block, procrastinating, why? What are the sources of the problems? And we're going to talk about this in more detail later. Motivation could be a problem. You're just not motivated. You hate the class, or you don't like the topic. That can be a serious hindrance to your effectiveness. Writing strategies, we'll talk about that more in another video. Metacognitive strategies. So metacognitive means you think about your learning process. You're actively planning about, okay, how am I going to do this? Is this a topic I like? Is this a writing topic I'm likely to do well at? Or do I need to put in more effort? How much more effort do I need to put in? Is this really a challenge for me? Okay, what do I need to do? Mentally rehearsing and visualizing, doing the paper. And this is not like wishful thinking where, like in some kind of mystical, supernatural sense, I imagine I'm going to get an A in the paper. No, that doesn't work. In fact, you can set yourself up for false expectations that will, and when they're not met, you don't get an A, but you get a C. Then you feel more depressed than before. What I mean is, imagine yourself doing specific things that you would need to do. You imagine yourself going to the library, and you imagine yourself creating a good outlining. And you imagine yourself spending like 2 hours straight typing the paper and looking up information, sources for your paper, mentally rehearsing how you're going to do this, and visualizing some of the specific things that you would need to do in order to be successful, because that can kind of help you to do that stuff that you need to do. How well do you understand the topic? The professor may give you a fairly broad topic, and you need to identify something more specific within that topic, something that you can do within a 3 to 5 page paper, because if you try to do the whole topic, it can be unmanageable. Think about, what do you know? What do you don't know? What do you need to learn about? What do you need to look up? What do you need to read about? What are some of the deeper issues and concepts of this topic? Because usually teachers give you a topic because they want you to learn more about the topic. It's not just writing for the sake of writing, but it's because they want you to understand something more deeply by doing this writing assignment, by thinking through it, and by reading about it. Next time in a later video, we're going to talk more specifically about processes, problems in the writing process that have to do with procrastinating, writer's block, problems with information and the focus of your paper, avoidance strategies, and second language issues in more detail. And we'll also talk more about writing strategies. The basic idea is you need to reflect on your writing process, and you need to find what works for you. Whatever combination of techniques works for you and your study habits, the kind of person you are, but also for the particular writing task that you have at hand. And it can vary depending on the kind of writing task, the kind of class that it's in, and which language you have to write in. So I hope this helps. I hope you can reflect on your writing process and maybe identify strengths and weaknesses of your writing process. What are the good things about your writing process? What are things that need to be improved? or change, or at least change when it comes to particular kinds of writing assignments. So that's all for this video. I wish you luck, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.